your host and chairperson of the Alliance for Finance, Nick Caton. And the topic of today's webinar is mediation in the workplace. We're going to be joined by two extremely experienced and skilled presenters in the field of mediation, who's going to be talking through, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit. But I just wanted to go over some initial topics. So we're obviously going to be giving you the opportunity to ask questions, but our speakers today, Lillian and Carla, will be taking you through the process of mediation, how they've seen it, and showing you some of the benefits that it can give you. My colleagues Kevin and Caroline will be looking after the chat and taking your questions. So please use the chat function to give us any questions that you might have, and just to discuss as well the topic, your experiences, and Caroline and Kevin will do their best to get the questions out of there and put them to Carla and Lillian at the end. Kevin, are you? So we seem to have some technical issues.
Yeah, sorry, Nick, there's a couple of people that have said on the chat that they can't hear you.
Well, I was just about to say, I'm not an expert in this. However, a lot of issues that we have seen seem to be fixed by turning it off and on again. So if you are having issues, could you try restarting, please? If it continues, then obviously we'll see if there's something the matter my end. But
no, I think everybody, it's a mixture. I think you're probably right. It's individuals, but others can hear you. So
okay, great, thank you. So excuse me. It's just this session will also be recorded. And it's going to be uploaded to the website. So if for any reason you are having problems, or you know anyone who's not been able to make it, or you need to drop out at any point, then you can check the website in a couple of days when it'll be uploaded. So that's alliance4finance.org. Now, by the very nature of what we do, I'm sure that a lot of you have come across mediation in one form or another, whether it's at work or even in your personal lives. And you know, we'll know a certain degree of what it involves, but I think potentially we have not really seen the full benefits. And from a trade union point of view, it often follows a messy grievance from a member. And the question is, are we as trade unionists, our members, are the employers getting the full potential benefits of it? And I would suggest not. Having spoken to a number of reps and members about this process in general, it's fair to say that in many occasions it's met with some skepticism. And a common comment was that it was a tick box exercise, seen as such either from the member or even from the employer. And a lot of the time the members didn't trust the neutrality of the process. And one comment that I heard a couple of times was, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. You know, suggesting that ultimately the mediator was on the employer's side. And I think it's fairly taken as truth amongst us all that in order for mediation to work, all parties need to commit to it and trust it. So how do we get over this issue? This might especially be the case when the mediator is naturally on one side or the other. And you know, I think it's fair to say, and we probably all agree that that's why we as representatives of our members are not mediators. We can't be mediators, even though what we might do is sort of similar in nature. We naturally gravitate towards protecting our members, but we do have an important role to play in this process, and we could encourage our members to trust more in the process, perhaps if we were better equipped. And hopefully today Lily and Carly are going to help us, give us some of that knowledge that are going to help us and our members take it more seriously. Perhaps by hearing directly from people who do this so successfully, we can understand where the issues are in terms of why it doesn't work sometimes. and start to use it to properly resolve issues at the earliest possible stage, which of course is of primary importance when it comes to good employee relations. Perhaps we're seeing mediation in the wrong light, and we need to better understand what success looks like in that sense. So our speakers today are Carla Mandis from Zurich Community Trust and Lillian Zachariah from the People Catalyst, both of whom have many years experience in mediation and believe passionately, I believe, we've had this conversation a few times, and you know, it certainly comes through in their passion about the process and the benefits it can bring. So I'm going to stop rambling on and pass you over now to Carla. First of all, Carla, if you want to just introduce yourself, and then when you want me to share the slides and continue, I can do so.
Lovely, thank you, Nick. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, brilliant. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm Carla Mandis. I'm a mediator. I qualified as a mediator in 2009 and specialise in workplace mediation. It's just coming up as saying it's bad network quality on my end, so apologies if you're having any difficulties. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes, but I've been practicing since 2009, and I work for Zurich Community Trust, and I get involved in internal workplace mediation for the Zurich Financial Services, Zurich UK. That's a little bit about me. I don't know actually, Lillian, if you want to come on now and actually say a little bit about yourself at this stage.
You're on mute, Millie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Carla. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Lillian Zachariah from the People Catalyst, and I got really interested in mediation some time ago. I was working as an area manager in government and was often asked to do or undertake investigations. And of course, investigations have their place. Although in many situations I felt that it had escalated unnecessarily, and surely there was a better way. Rather than imposing decisions, wouldn't it be great if the people in dispute could actually resolve the issues themselves with some help? So I decided to qualify as a mediator. I then convinced the organisation this was the way forward. And it supported, I was asked to support HR to bring people back from sick absence, because there was apparently a big issue on sick absence. And on further investigation as to why people were off with anxiety, stress, etc., further analysis showed that actually it was around perceived bullying and actual bullying. So again, mediation for me was the champion, and it worked really well. It was very effective. And so I decided, after realising how much I enjoyed being a mediator, that I should leave being an area manager in government or head of welfare and actually become a full-time mediator. So that's a bit about me. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here. Over to you, Carla.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Lillian. Nick, if we could actually have the start of the slides, please, that would be wonderful. So hopefully everybody can see the slides okay. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through what our aims are for today. So we're going to explore these key areas. So what mediation is and what it's not. We're going to look at suitability for mediation. Not all cases are suitable for mediation, so it's really important that us as mediators establish that at the very beginning before we go on to have one-to-one sessions. We're going to look at a comparison with other processes. So Lillian and I take part in something called mediation that is facilitative. So we basically are there to facilitate mediation, but we're not there to impose our ideas on the parties. That's not our role. And we'll actually talk about some of the other comparisons to other processes and other alternative dispute resolution as we go through. We'll have a look at the overview of the mediation in the workplace process. So how basically it starts from the time that we're instructed through to the very end, and we'll explore things like our environment, making sure that the environment is right for the parties and is really conducive to having a successful mediation session. We'll also explore the LAETR model, which is a model that many mediators use when they go through the mediation process. It keeps us on track, and it also makes sure that, you know, we're being as successful as we can as mediators. We're then going to explore both internal and external mediation as well, the pros and cons of that. So there are definitely pros and cons to both, and we'll explore why actually in some situations it may be actually more appropriate to have an external mediator, but in certain situations it's absolutely fine to have an internal. Lillian and I will be sharing our case studies, so we'll track back through some of our experiences as mediators and cases we've been able to resolve, or ones where we haven't actually been capable to get to a written agreement. And then we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have. Okay, Nick, next slide, please. Okay, so starting off, we're going to look at conflict left unresolved. So we're going to have a look both at from an organisation's perspective and also from a people's perspective. So for the organisation itself, it can be very time consuming to leave conflict unresolved. So whether that's managers, parties, HR, I've been in quite a privileged position throughout my career to have different jobs, which involves being involved in tribunal claims through to working as an employee relations consultant, an external HR consultant, and as a mediator. So I've actually been able to see that the cycle, you know, from start to finish. And one of the reasons why I became a mediator was because I was getting very frustrated, having gone through the litigation process, as to how many of these cases end up before an employment tribunal, when actually it was so unnecessary. If we'd have had the mediation at the very beginning, I truly believe that it wouldn't have got that far. So it was partly out of frustration as to one of the reasons as to why I became a mediator. There is also a massive impact on morale in the organisation. We know that these things tend to spread wildfire. If someone's feeling disgruntled, if they're feeling upset as to what's happening to them in the workplace, and that conflict's not dealt with, of course it does have a knock-on effect. And naturally that will have a knock-on effect with productivity as well. I've lost count the amount of times that people have said to me, it's affecting my productivity at work, I'm finding it hard to concentrate. And also people tend to, when they're in a conflict situation, they tend to magnify everything as well with the person concerned. So something that would actually is pretty innocuous, it's not something that actually had any bad feeling or any ill intent from the other person, can suddenly become far more than what it actually is. And of course then it has the potential to spread in the organisation as well. More people are disgruntled, of course people then talk. It can lead to tribunal claims, and of course that has a knock-on effect with reputation, both internally and externally. And we all know that none of us want to go and work for an employer that doesn't deal well with conflict resolution. So there's lots of reasons why an organisation should tackle or deal with conflict. And then from a people perspective, just the stress and the anxiety, you'll know that as trade union representatives, just how anxious these conflicts can leave people feeling, and over time that if it's not dealt with, that can manifest and become depression. So it's really important that people have an opportunity to deal with that conflict. It can lead to people feeling unsupported in the workplace. And if I had £1 for every time someone said to me, this happened and it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and therefore I couldn't do it anymore, and that person's gone off on sickness absence, I'd be a rich lady. It's so many times you hear it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and they just can't face going into work. In the workplace environment, of course, others can feel pressure to take sides as well. So again, it impacts on that morale, impacts on the team. And unfortunately, we know in life there's always game players. You know, there's always people that have an agenda, and sometimes conflict plays into their hands. So we also have to be mindful of that. There can sometimes, unfortunately, be other reasons as to why conflict left unresolved serves some people. And then people also feel invalidated if steps are not taken to try and deal with these issues. Lillian, is there anything else you'd like to add to this slide?
So I was just taking myself off mute. Only to say that sometimes if it's not dealt with and it's allowed to continue, sometimes parties can start to sabotage other goals of the organisation, or in fact of colleagues, you know, just to create even more drama. So it is really important to get it resolved. But no, thank you.
Definitely, thank you, Lillian. Next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so we're just going to have a look at what is and what is not mediation. So it's really important at the outset we say it's not intended to be the panacea of all HR solutions related to conflict. It's not a magic bullet. It has its place. What I love about mediation is that ability to actually get the parties talking. And it's often the first time that parties can come together and actually talk about how they feel. So it's actually not only is it a mental process, a physical process, it's actually very emotional, and that's really important for the parties. So mediation comes under the umbrella of ADR, which is alternative dispute resolution. So that's a process by which an independent, impartial third party helps two or more people in conflict. So there has, you know, you can have mediations involving just two individuals, but you can have 3, you can have groups. There can be all manner of reasons as to why that ends up needing mediation. It's widely used in all areas of life. So both Lillian and I take part in workplace mediation, but I know Lillian actually works as a family mediator as well, so get involved with marital disputes, particularly when it comes to children as well. So any area where there's dispute, often used for neighbourhood disputes, for example, and it can be a really useful tool for that. It can be used anytime before, during and after a formal process, and sometimes actually we'll put a formal process in abeyance for mediation to take part. So it can be suitable at any stage. Well, of course, as mediators, we say the sooner you take part in mediation, the better. Of course, the sooner you address these issues, it's always easier. But that's not to say it's not going to be successful after a formal process as well. It's certainly not soft and fluffy. That's definitely, we often hear that a lot, and it's not. A lot of time and energy is invested in this process. And one of the first things I talk to the mediation parties about is actually preparing themselves, because it is, while mediation itself is technically a straightforward process, it's quite emotional on the parties, and it's a long day. So I always say to the parties, come prepared, you know, really think about what you want to get out of the day, bearing in mind the focus of mediation is not to concentrate on the past. Yes, you are dealing with the past, but the focus is very much a future focus. So come to the mediation session with an idea of what you'd like to get out of it, but don't stay fixed, because you don't know what you're going to hear during that mediation. So stay open-minded and see what it brings. So that's what I try and prepare the mediation parties for that. And then it's not a form of therapy. That's really important. We're not counsellors. However, having said that, it's quite incredible what you hear in mediation, and you'll hear in some of the case studies, actually, some of the difficult situations that Lillian and I have had to deal with. But fortunately, how we've been able to signpost those people to getting the help and the support that they need. But Lillian, is there something that you'd like to say about this slide?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that really, as you say, Carla, it's not therapy, but what we do find very, very often is that people say that when it's been successful, it's a weight's off their shoulders, because carrying around conflict is not good. Getting people to walk to work and dreading going in because they don't know what's going to happen that day can be really debilitating. So we do find that although it's not therapy, it has a therapeutic outcome when dealt with successfully. But thank you.
Definitely. And I think it's over to you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm not going to read through all of these around suitability, but just to say that generally speaking, most things are suitable for mediation. What's needed for it to be successful is people genuinely wanting to come to the table. Of course, you'll always have lip service. Of course, you'll always have people who just want to tick a box. But you can filter those out very quickly as we enter into the process of mediation, because not all cases that start off in mediation will eventually go into a joint session, but we'll talk about that as we go along today. Generally speaking, I'm probably biased anyway. I'm a full-time mediator, as Carla has said. I think it's a profession of its own. The more you do it, the better you get at it. I'm definitely not the mediator I was in 2004 when I qualified. Comes confidence, etc. But for me, most workplace issues can be brought to mediation. There is a debate about when mediation is most successful, if it's at the early stages or the latter stages. For me, again, if people are genuinely wanting to resolve it, it can get resolved at any stage. So some of the issues we've got here is around complaints about behaviour, complaints about resulting in allegations and counter allegations. Of course, a lot of the time when we're in conflict, it's because the communication we're having is not effective. People feel they're not being listened to, or they're not being understood, or people are making assumptions. And unfortunately, in reality, when it comes to behaviours, it's not really based on fact. It's actually based on people's perceptions or experiences. A lot of the times conflicts happens because someone is triggering someone off. They may have had a bad experience in the past in a different workplace. So they start somewhere new and they're adamant that that's never going to happen again. So the minute someone is triggering something off in them, they get defensive. So what happens is you feel someone's attacking you, your guard comes up, and then you counter-attack. And so we get what I call the conflict dance. And a lot of the time, if people sit down and are just willing to listen to each other, ask questions for clarification, it's amazing. Magic can really happen. And I'm totally sold on mediation. As I said, I left a successful career in government to become a full-time mediator. What can I tell you? Following a formal grievance procedure. Here we go. Now, as investigators, some of you, investigations definitely have their place, particularly when you need to draw in facts, timings, etc. But a lot of the time, people are drawn into grievance processes, and you might get witnesses who are reluctant, who don't want to be involved, but are being dragged into a process they do not want to get involved in, but feel they have to because it's the workplace and their bosses want them to get involved in this, getting interviewed, and that then creates further breakdown. And the problem is, people that are in conflict who have gone through an investigation, unless they're moving on to a different department or leaving the organisation, there's still an ongoing relationship that's required. So again, it creates more issue, escalated unnecessarily. So when I was trained to be a mediator, I was told that mediation was not appropriate for grades if there was an imbalance in grade. I totally disagree with that. I've mediated for chief executive with an admin officer. The admin officer had accused the chief executive of being racist at a conference. It was a housing association, if I recall. But both parties wanted to come to mediation. It was a safe space for them both. It was really very successful. The chief executive was really good at listening, explained what her intention was, but was also educated by the admin officer who took her to task around what she had said and how that was received. So it was a really good mediation session, which could have gone probably to tribunal if they'd not gone to mediation and exhausted other avenues. It also says here, all issues, if you require a third party to come up with the outcomes or to approve outcomes, then it may or may not be successful. Having said that, sometimes what you find is there are lots of different strands to a conflict, and say there are 10 issues, that they can resolve 7 of them. The other 3 might need a third party to sanction. But if they come to it from a common place, so they're both approaching, for example, a director to say, look, we've resolved these, but these are outstanding, but we both agree that this would be helpful, and it's sanctioned by the third party, again, a really successful case. We can't deal with alleged criminal activity. Obviously, we would have to break confidentiality if someone disclosed something that was of a criminal nature. We have here serious mental health, so it wouldn't be suitable if people have mental health issues. I'm glad we've got serious there because, you know, again, when I was being trained, I was told, you know, you mustn't deal with people who have got have mental health issues, and I don't agree. Again, if people have the capacity to make decisions for themselves, who are we as mediators to say that they are not capable? You know, depression is mental health, anxiety is mental health. That does not mean you cannot make your own decisions. So I think, again, we need to tread carefully here. Of course, if someone has psychosis or schizophrenia and they are under strong medication, that may be questionable. But again, you would filter that out once you've spoken to the individuals to identify what best course of action is needed for them. But generally, when people are in conflict, what they really want is, one, to be heard, to be understood, and also to be able to gain clarity. So I think I've sort of shown you that I believe mediation is for almost everything, but not. So let's see. Can we go to the next slide? Is that me or Carla? Let's have a look. Okay, so here we've got some comparisons of different processes. One of the beauties of mediation is, for now, and there is debate about this, but it is a voluntary process. There are a lot of people who have got a legal background who insist that it shouldn't be voluntary, it should be made compulsory. But I think that's more of a money-making thing for a lot of the lawyers that have jumped on the bandwagon of mediation. I think it should remain voluntary. It encourages people to participate. It's without prejudice. So what that means is that if the mediation were not to be successful, the parties could then invoke a more formal process, for example, an investigation. It is future focused. I'm just picking a few. I'm not going to go through all. It's future focused. But that doesn't mean, again, when we're trained as mediators, we're told that, you know, you don't go into the past, you look forward, you're moving people forward. But for me, I think I don't agree with that either. If you don't explore what happened in the past, it feels for the participants that it's being put under the carpet, that we're not really dealing with the issue, we're dealing with the surface stuff, and we're trying to push people to move forward when they're not ready to. So I encourage people in mediation that, providing they're comfortable, we should go to the past so that we can ensure that if a similar situation were to happen in the future, what needs to be different so that the same issue doesn't occur. You need to learn by what's happened so that it's not repeated. Many times people will offend or upset somebody or cause them an issue without even being aware of it. I'm not saying that there aren't horrible people out there and people don't do things deliberately. And of course, when it comes to bullying, you know, as adults, we should really know that we're impacting on people. But sometimes in harassment cases, people are totally oblivious because what may be acceptable to them and also in their culture, in their values, is not acceptable to others. So it's really important that we do give some time to the past, but then move people forward to, okay, so that's what you don't want to happen. What do you want instead? So you're getting people to then focus on the future. The only time we would break confidentiality in mediation is if there was someone had sort of claimed that they were in danger of themselves or going to cause harm to somebody else. We would break confidentiality. Also, if a criminal offence was committed, so for example, if someone discloses in their one-to-one session that they've committed fraud against the organisation, we would have to break confidentiality, but tell them that we're doing that too. It's only ever happened once to me, and I've been mediating since 2004-05, that sort of time. What we like about mediation is it's quick. For a two-party mediation, a day, possibly two, if it's quite entrenched. Very quick. The outcomes are outcomes that the parties have come to. Now, although we're not there to give advice, what we can do is if parties have made progress but are getting stuck, sometimes they'll look to the mediator to make suggestions. So we have to be careful. But again, it's down to the confidence of the mediator. What I would do is I would ask, are you asking me to make some suggestions? And if they say, yes, please, but both of them are, what I would do is I say, well, I can't tell you what to do, but what I can share with you is in similar cases, these are the sort of outcomes that came about. Would that work for you? So again, they are in charge of what may or may not work for them. In terms of the other side, as you can see, investigations, the outcomes are imposed. There might be recommendations. The investigator may be asked to make recommendations or may be asked just to present the evidence, depending on what it is. So they don't get involved in the decision making. And the other thing is that when Carla was talking about mediation not being a therapy, not being therapeutic, again here, when things are imposed on people because they have not had the opportunity to be involved in the decision making, that in itself can sometimes cause more conflicts. It can polarize, it can exasperate the issues rather than looking at where there's some common ground to build on. And of course, as we said already, it can cause further conflicts where people have been drawn into an investigation as a witness. So further breakdowns happen, more entrenched issues. And occasionally the investigating officer will actually recommend mediation anyway. So again, if people are not happy with the outcome of the investigation, they may decide to leave. That then means you need to employ new people. You've got the training costs that go with that, all the associated costs, etc. And you may lose good staff and the reputation of the organisation of retaining good staff. So, Carla, is there anything you'd like to add on this slide?
Just looking through, I think everything you've said, I absolutely agree with. I've had situations before where parties have been really found it difficult to come to some solutions. And I know that's not our job. So in that instance, I've just given suggestions based on other mediation sessions that I've had and said, well, other parties have done this, this and this. Would that work for you? Just to sort of get that, the ideas flowing really, where they've really had a bit of a stalemate. But otherwise, all good.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so here we've got the process of mediation. So basically a request would come in. the mediator would look at it to look to see if the parties have the authority to resolve the issues between themselves, or whether it needs a third party. We would then arrange a one-to-one. So that's the opportunity for the parties to be able to talk with the mediator. And I almost feel that the one-to-one is just as important as the joint session, because it's at this stage that, one, the mediator gets to understand what the issues are for the party. It allows you to build good rapport, because you need the parties to believe in you, to trust in you. So you have that opportunity to show them that you demonstrate that you are there to support them both, to facilitate rather than to make judgment. But if they want their pound of flesh, you need to really manage their expectations, because it's not about proving who's right and wrong. What it is about is people's needs to be heard, and to see if there is any way that what they need can actually be given, be served. So for me, the mediation one-to-one is just as important as the joint session. We will manage the expectations, we will build good rapport, we will encourage them to participate, and explore also any fears. So sometimes I'll say, so what must not happen? What is there anything that I can do to make you feel comfortable? And as Carla said earlier on, it's not a fluffy process. If you think about it, in investigations, people can talk to the investigating officer, knowing that there's no one else in the room. They can say whatever they like, and then they can hide behind what they've said, because the investigator takes that on. As opposed to having to sit in the same room with someone who has caused you upset, etc. So, but it's also a good opportunity at the one-to-one to identify what's beneath the surface, because a lot of the time the presenting issues, what people are telling their managers or HR is the issue, is not always the case, but are not prepared to share that with, if you like, an internal person. So a lot of the times they won't share certain things, whereas with the mediator, you get to what the real root cause is, what's really going on. Get parties to also focus at the one-to-one. What would they like instead? Because a lot of the times people are telling you what they're not happy about, what's caused them to be so distressed. What they're not able to do is tell you what they want instead. They want the issue to go away, but they don't really know what they want instead. But that could also be because they're not willing to consider what their contribution is in the conflict. And so it's for us to be very respectful and mindful about how we bring that out in the individual, and the way we question and we probe to sort of get them to start to reflect on, actually, yeah, because they did this, I did this as well. So it just caused the conflict to become even bigger than what it really needed to be. So it's an opportunity for us to really get to what the crux is, not just what's presenting initially. So once we've done the one-to-one, providing it's suitable to go into joint session, we then arrange the joint session. That could be in the same day, or it could be a following day. It just depends. Each case, for me, is reviewed differently. I'm not set on a particular model. It's what suits the parties, what suits the organisation. Sometimes a day or two of an opportunity to reflect between the one-to-one and the joint session can be really helpful. There's also a different process called shuttle mediation, which means where parties, it's very entrenched. There may have been some physical violence, etc. So it's not safe to put people in the same room, or maybe just people refusing to be in the same room. What we can do is have either what we call a caucus, that's more of a legal term, or what we call shuttle mediation in workplace, which is where the parties are in separate rooms and the mediator works between the rooms to get agreement of how to move forward. And on those occasions, what I've managed to do is get them in different rooms, but eventually, if there's an ongoing relationship, it's really important to get them in the same room. So I very much encourage, once we've started to make progress, I bring them into the same room so that when I've left, they are in a better place. It's not just for the day of mediation, because that's just not It's just not conducive, it's not sensible, logical. So yes, so once the joint session is finished and it's hopefully been successful, some mediators will write up the outcome agreement there and then in the room. Others will draft it up that evening and send it out in the morning or whenever, close after, for them to check for accuracy. It's then signed off, and it's their agreement, again, without prejudice. It's basically an honorary note of what was agreed, so people stay on track. Sometimes they want the person who referred the case to mediation to also have a copy. It really is up to them. The agreement is really about the individuals. Yeah, I think that's all. Again, so once we've done the agreement at the joint session, there's also an opportunity to have a debrief. A lot of the time, the participants want to sort of say, how do you think it went? Did I present myself well? That's just a little bit of validation, I think, and I will forever say to people, you did really well done, and etc. So it just feels good. Occasionally, because the conflict was so entrenched, parties are happy to move forward, have agreed their outcomes, but there's a little bit of hesitation of the unknown. So what I always say is, there's the option of returning to mediation in 3 to 6 months to observe progress, see how you're getting on, and is there anything else that needs to be tinkered just to sort of continue on the right path. And a lot of the time people won't come back, but that little caveat makes them feel safe. Occasionally people will come back, and that's fine, because we'll explore how they're doing against point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., and then look to see what needs a bit more adjusting. But generally speaking, mediation's successful. I'm biased, I know, but it's also very successful. I've only ever had 5 cases that haven't resolved, and I've been mediating since 2004. So there we are. Is there anything else I need to tell you? No, I think I will wait for questions later. Carla, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. So that was a fantastic summary of the process. Just want to add in a few bits, mainly around the environment as well, and just some of the things in terms of positioning as well when we go in to our one-to-ones and our joint sessions. So I always stress the reason for me why I'm there. I'm purely there to facilitate. I'm an impartial facilitator. I reinforce all the confidentiality, as Lillian's already said about it being a without prejudice process. But most importantly, I set out the ground rules as to what the expectation is of the parties during the mediation session. So one of the most important thing is respect, just being respectful of each other. It's not easy to go in and start talking about your emotions to someone else who you've been in conflict with. So it's a case of please be respectful of each other. Think about your language and think about actually what you're hearing as well. And actually, how would you feel if you were hearing that? Just to try and start building some of that empathy. And sometimes I find we tread a little bit of a fine line. Me personally, because you're building rapport, and it's really important that you keep that rapport there, because you want them to talk to you, you really want to get to the nub of the issues, and the only way you're going to do that is if they trust you, and actually if they feel they can talk to you. So you're constantly actively listening, making sure you're getting your understanding, and also referring back, you're playing back some of your understanding as well. The worst thing that you can have is for that party to feel like you haven't really understood the issues, or you're going to the joint session without really understanding how they feel. And Lillian's right, the past is really important, because the past is the reason why we're here, but the future is where we want to be. So I always say to them, keep an open mind, because you might hear things that you just weren't aware of before, and that may change your perspective on why this has happened. The other thing to think about is the environment. So I'm really careful about how I set up a room for both a one-to-one session and a joint session. So I try to make sure that the room itself is, you know, just things like it's soundproof, so they can be sure about confidentiality, that it's the right temperature so they feel comfortable, that it's set out in a U shape. I do the desk in a U shape. And I also find that really important for when you're getting two people in a room that may not have been together for a while, or you know, there is hurt there's anger. So typically you want to give them something, it's almost like a bit of a barrier, but something that they feel protected by. And that's why the layout of the tables is really important, because you don't want the parties opposite each other. So if you can do a U shape, you can create an environment where they're not opposing each other. They've got a table so they can take notes. I also use flip charts sometimes as well in my mediation sessions, just so I can make sure I understand the issues. Also, just to literally go through what the process is as well. I can literally have a flip chart to say, this is what you can expect from the process, or I can use a flip chart during the day just to get some key points that person wants me to make sure that I get across, to help them in the joint mediation session. Because confidentiality is key, I also make it really clear that I am not going to share anything that they haven't given me permission to. So that's why, as mediators, it's really important we're clear before we go into that joint session what they're okay with us speaking about, or prompting them in the joint session, to make sure that we're not breaching any confidentiality. So that's a really important part for me. And then Lillian's already said mediators can do it differently. So some mediators will go away and do the agreement. I don't. I literally physically do it there in the room. And the reason I do it is because I want the parties to go out of that meeting having something that they can take home and say, right, we've reached an agreement. So typically what I do is I handwrite the agreement for the parties. Now, if there is an opportunity to have a photocopier, I'll let them have a break, go and get teas and coffees, refreshment break. I will go and get photocopies of the written agreement, and literally physically come back to the room, rip up the original and give them the photocopies, or I will handwrite both of them, depending on how long it is. And like I said, they will go off and have breaks while I literally physically write the agreement and then get them back in. And we go through what I've written to make sure that they're okay with it. Do they want to add anything? And then I get the parties to sign. And I think it's quite a powerful process for them to physically see each other signing each agreement. So they've and this is why it's important that no one gets the original, you know, in terms of if you're going to get the photocopies, it's a level playing field. So they both get a copy, or they both get an original, and they both sign those documents. So they physically go away with an agreement. Now it's different for everybody, but also for me as a mediator, I like to know, right, we've resolved it, you know, we've come away with that, and typically that's worked quite well for me. Trying to think if there's anything else. No, I think that's a good overview of the mediation process. I think over to you, Nick.
Thank you. I just thought, as you mentioned a break, I thought it might be a good place to take one. And some really interesting things that that you were talking about, and I've already come up with a couple of questions as my prerogative as chair, which I'll share with you later. But whilst we've got a kind of natural break, I thought it might be a good time just to take 5 minutes and get everyone to recharge their cups of coffee or whatever, and then we'll come back. So everyone, if I can ask you to come back at 11:56, then we'll start from there again. Thank you. Okay, I won't jump the gun just yet. Let people get a chance to sit down. But and not to put you too much on the spot, Lily and Carla, if you're back, but I did just some of the things that you have been discussing did raise something in my head, and thought I could ask the question, and I'm not sure if you're going to touch on it or whether you want to just answer it directly. But obviously, from a trade union point of view, and some of the things that we deal with when we're talking about whether it's grievances, disciplinaries, and just dispute resolution in general, confidentiality is so important. It's vital in some of the things we do. And I wonder whether you've come across a scenario whereby someone has been reluctant to go into mediation because they feel that it may then get back to the employer and therefore incriminate themselves. And I'm not suggesting, because I think I know the answer as to whether or not it can be used, it's without prejudice. But what would you say to someone who has that worry that actually by entering into this process that actually they may then find themselves the victim of a disciplinary procedure because of what actually they need to say in order to try and resolve the issue? Does that make sense?
Apologies, I only came back part way through that, Nick, so sorry, I had a delivery.
No, said you might. Well, Carla, just to re-emphasize, it was basically just what you might say to someone who feels that they can't enter into the process because actually being open and honest in the process might incriminate themselves in the workplace and lead to further disciplinary action. So, Lillian, can I start with you? What would your thoughts be?
Yeah, I've got to be careful here because I don't want it to sound that I'm anti-internal mediators, but that's really where an external mediator is so much better. And I mean that with the greatest respect to Carla. The minute you're inside the organisation, people, it doesn't matter if it's not fact, their perception will be that the mediator could be pressured into disclosing, etc. They don't understand the way that we're trained, and also it's down to individuals. It would be a bit like saying, all trade unions are fantastic. The principles are, but each practitioner would maybe come out with a completely different way of processing something. So that's the same again with mediation. I think that's the perception of people who don't fully understand the impartiality of a mediator, and I think it's more likely if it's an add-on function rather than their professional career. So I think sometimes people feel that they could be more influenced. I don't know. I mean, again, with the greatest respect to Carla, because I know Carla's not that way inclined, but just generally speaking,
Well, Carla, do you want to argue back? I mean, no, adds to it.
No. Of course I'll respond. So yeah, absolutely, there's valid. I can't even say the word. What Lillian has said is very valid. But from my perspective, it's about being really open and upfront with individuals at the very beginning as to my role, to reassure them that I am truly impartial. Now, we do have slides on this later on in the slide deck where Lillian and I go through this in a little bit further detail. But it's about reassuring them that whatever is discussed remains confidential. And the only thing I ever tell an organisation, and anybody who knows on this call that has instructed a mediator, all they'll tell you at the very end of it is whether or not the mediation has been successful. And by that we mean whether or not an agreement has been entered into. So it's easy for me in that respect, because I come out, it's a part of my mediation sessions, my joint sessions, that I will draft those mediation agreements. So I can very easily call the next day and say, right, it's been successful, and the fact that a mediation agreement has been written up. And that's all I say. Don't say anything more.
Thank you. No, that was really helpful. Okay, well, I mean, I'll go back to the slides then, and start sharing those now, and I'll turn my camera off. So you can continue, I think, onto the LAETR model.
Okay. Okay, so this is the model that I tend to use when I'm going through a mediation process. So you'll see that there are 5 aspects to it. There's the listen, the ask, the explore, the test, the resolve. So the first one is the active listening. You absolutely want to understand that person's frame of reference, and you really need to get to the nub of those issues that have led to that dispute. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is through your active listening. It is an exhausting process, and I always say this to everybody, even though it's a simple process, the steps that you go through this model, it is draining on all the parties. So I was saying to Lillian actually before, as we were doing these slides, I always try and do my mediations on a Friday, and the reason is because I want the parties to have that time over the weekend to reflect and actually get their energy back, because it is quite an exhausting process. When you think of it, physically you're running around to get to a venue, and it's full on during the day. Mentally it's draining also, because we ask them to prepare for it in advance as well, and to really think about what they want to get out of the process. And then emotionally it's really draining on them. So I always bring a box of tissues with me to every single mediation, and it doesn't matter whether it's female or male, it can end in tears, because it's been, and some of these things have been going on for years, so 2, 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes even longer. So there's all this pent up, anger, frustration, upset, and suddenly someone's listening to them and the floodgates tend to open. And that's what I find a lot in my sessions. And that's why the building the rapport and the active listening is so important. And of course, then you're asking the questions, you're asking appropriate questions and relevant questions based on what they've said to you. And that is to also help you really clarify your understanding of the background to the dispute, and to make sure that, you understand all the issues, and, have I got this right? Or, is this understanding of right? It's just that probing. And also it shows that you're listening. Then you explore the options for resolution with them. And again, this goes back to what Lillian was saying. We talk about the past, absolutely, but we're getting them to focus on the future, because it's really important that they have that future focus. How are we going to get through this? If you two are going to work together in the future, how are you going to make this workable and more pleasant in the working environment, rather than something that you dread doing? And then you test. So certainly in the joint session, it's about testing and reality checking what solutions they've come up with, and really have they thought it through. And I think I've said before, it's very rare that I offer any solutions, but I'll do it if they're really stuck, and they just need a bit of prompting. But otherwise, the parties are pretty good at, coming up with their solutions and working out between themselves as to why something would work or wouldn't work. And then resolving. So by dispute, we summarise the party's position, we enter into a written agreement, and we bring the mediation to a close. I always thank them for being part of that process. It's very brave actually to come in and be part of mediation. It takes a lot out of them. I always thank them for being part of the process and doing their bit at trying to bring the conflict to an end. It's not an easy thing to do, so they should celebrate that and give themselves a pat on the back without being patronising. It's really recognising what they've done to try and move this forward. So that in a nutshell is the model that I tend to use. Lillian, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Thank you, Carla. No, as you say, this is a typical mediation model. They're regurgitated in different ways. They'll have different titles, but that really is the model of mediation. The thing is to also remember that conflicts don't always resolve in a straight line. So you may feel that you've made some progress, some good progress, and then someone says or does something during the mediation that makes people feel like they're going backwards again. And it's at that time when the mediator needs to sort of keep encouraging people to go, because I believe that's when the magic happens, because people may be avoiding going right to what the real issue is. And so providing it's safe to and you're encouraging and moving people forward, because as I said, conflicts can sometimes, it's a bit like the octopus, you know, all these different sort of things coming into play. Someone says something, it's triggered something else off that wasn't even mentioned right at the outset when they first set their, you know, when they're first setting the scene, which is, you know, why they're at mediation in the first instance in the joint session. And it's important for us to keep going, because I believe that's when the magic happens. I actually had a case a while back 2-3 months ago where, you know, Carla, when you feel like, yes, you're making great progress, and then all of a sudden you think, actually, we're not making any progress here at all. And there was something that they were not saying, and I thought, right, is it appropriate or not? They were both very senior people. One was a finance director, and the other was an ops director. And I sort of paused the mediation and said, forgive me, but is there something that the two of you are not sharing here that needs to be discussed? And with that, the finance director burst out crying. And in my head, of course, in the privacy of my head, I'm thinking, oh dear. And I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to upset or offend you. Let's take a break, a 5-minute break, and can we talk separately? And actually, the other person, the ops director, said, actually, Lillian, you've hit the nail on the head. And then he said to the finance director, can I divulge? And she said yes. And actually, they'd been having an affair. They'd left their partners. There was lots of other things going on that had nothing to do with the issues that were brought to mediation. But that's when and that was like 3 hours into the joint session. So again, you know, if it's right and it's appropriate, as a mediator, you're not doing this, but you are inquiring. And sometimes that's what, it's almost the permission for people to be, well, actually, this isn't really, this is just the surface stuff. This is what's really going on. And they were both hurt. They'd left their partners, etc. And, you know, one of them went back to their partner, the other one didn't, and so felt aggrieved and felt upset. But it was all happening in meetings where all the directors and the chief executive were fed up of these two bickering, but they obviously are not aware, and were never going to be aware that these guys had actually left their partners and were having an affair. It didn't come out. Of course, it was confidential, but what we did agree was how they could move forward. And all that was really needed there was for the party that went back to their partner to understand and acknowledge their contribution and also apologise, and that was it. So you just never know what comes out of mediation, never quite linear. Thank you. Thanks, Carla. Back to you.
Thank you. No, Lillian, that's a fantastic example. And it just shows actually also as a mediator how important it is that you listen to your instincts as well, and you make sure you read between the lines, because you're absolutely right. Sometimes you just get a vibe that you're not getting the entire story, and sometimes you can probe and not get any further. But of course, in Lillian's case, she was successful in getting them to disclose to her, you know, what was actually really going on, and which probably was, by the sounds of it, the real nub of the issues. So so that's really, yeah, really important. Okay, I think it's next slide. Thanks, Nick. So we're just going to have a look at internal versus external mediation, and I'll cover the internal bit, and then I'll pass over to Lillian to look at the external part. But this is also based on a lot of perception as well. So I'll just take you through the points. So this is, so someone internal is likely to have a better knowledge of the organisational culture and the big picture. So So from that instance, you know, they know what the organisation's like, and they'll know some of the people, so they'll be in a good position to go into the mediation with that in mind. They can typically have less experience because it's an add-on role, and certainly from my perspective, even though I've been practicing since 2009. I'm sure I haven't taken part in half as many mediations as Lillian. I don't do it full time, and I do it as an add-on role. And I try and do at least one mediation a year. It can typically be two or three, depends on the need of the organisation. I used to do external mediation as well as a full-time job, and I found that was a little bit too much, so I stepped back. But it's important for me to keep that experience and keep the skills alive. So that's really important for me, that I continue to do those mediations. There can be a perception of the grievance not being given sufficient weight if you don't get an external mediator. Some people think that, you know, that can be the case. You always reassure them that that is not. There can be a perceived bias where there is none, simply because you're paid by the organisation and they think that there's some sort of affinity there, or some reason as to why it wouldn't be truly confidential, which goes on to that suspicion about confidentiality, which is why I said before, I make it very clear at the outset that I am truly independent, impartial and confidential. I suppose what helps me in one sense is I work for Zurich Community Trust, which is the charity arm of the Zurich business. It's a separate legal entity, so it's actually detached from Zurich UK. And the Zurich UK guys have always been brilliant. You know, they know where I stand in terms of confidentiality, and they understand the mediation process, so never in a million years would they ask me to divulge anything. They know it's entirely confidential, and I can reassure people as to that. And then a perceived fear of reprisal. So sometimes they think that we may be worried about reprisals against us. That doesn't cross my mind. Maybe it's because because of the setup I'm in. A possibility of holding back. That person can hold back because they don't want to appear weak or show vulnerability, particularly as you may come across them in the future, because you share a workplace. So even though we're a separate legal entity, of course, we engage with Zurich UK all the time, and our client base, essentially the employees who are volunteers, I can come across and work with them if they work for the business. So it may well be the case that I come across these people that I've mediated for in the future, and they can sometimes hold back as well, or they think that we can hold back for the same reasons, and it's just not the case. And then over to you, Lillian.
Thank you, Carla. Yeah, I'm looking at the external. Obviously, I'm an external mediator. It's what I do day in, day out. There is that perception of, well, it's not a perception, it's fact that we are independent, so we don't have any internal knowledge or allegiances to anybody. Having said that, as an external mediator, what I find, which wasn't something that I found as an internal mediator when I introduced mediation, was that a lot of the time people see you as an external consultant, so they want to sort of interview you first to check that you're the right fit for the organisation, which I have absolutely no objection to. In fact, it's fine. What I found when I was an internal mediator was I was conscious that a very senior manager was going to put pressure on me with a particular case that I was dealing with. So because I knew the character, I'd geared myself up when I was going in to meet with them, that I preempted the conversation. So the first thing that I did after sort of saying hello, etc., was to actually say something along the lines of, I know you really do appreciate that in my capacity as, and at the time I think I was head of welfare, in my capacity as head of welfare, you do appreciate that I'm bound by confidentiality. But what I can share with you is, and obviously it was stuff that I'd already agreed with the parties. So that's not a nice place to be, because some organisations are a lot more, particularly sort of government departments, you know, they really feel that they can sort of get you on side. So that's the side of things that I didn't enjoy as an internal mediator. But I was confident enough to be able to back that back without worrying too much. But coming back to the external mediators, yes, they're independent. There is a perception that they would be more, and I do this with small, you know, that they know what they're doing, you know, whereas someone internally, you know, oh, it's just an add-on. There are loads of different perceptions that go on, and perceptions, unfortunately, is how people operate in a lot of cases. Don't think there's too much. The fact that sometimes they'll hold back. Again, if you're an internal mediator, they may hold back. They don't want to show their vulnerability, or they may not actually want to show their true self. You know, sometimes people are on an act. So I think there's pros and cons for both. And of course, I'm biased because I'm an external, and I'll put that out there straight away. But I do know Carla is extremely professional, and I'm going to stop there. But thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Lillian. That's great. And now I think it's over to the next slide, please, Nick. Brilliant.
Nick
Thank
and
you.
Carla and Lillian, can I just be a little bit cheeky, because there's a whole conversation going on in the chat around the internal external.
Yeah.
And so Lillian and Carla, I know you both equally well. Carla, we've worked in the same organisation. The question was touching on, is internal mediation always done by HR? So I think that's a simple one. And Lillian has partly answered that by welfare. And then there's this whole thing that you were getting into, Lillian, your example with the chief executive. Does that contain things? Does it start to change the shape of it? And I think you almost answered the question, I think, because this is my view, and I'm laying it on you for you to totally disagree with or do whatever you want with. But I would say it's about the people, and it's about the integrity. And I think Carly was touching on that in terms of the HR people you work with. So the question, would you always expect internal mediation to be done by a particular job title, e.g. HR? And how do you think that person deals with the fact that there may be pressure on them or an expectation that they share more than an external mediator would?
Are you speaking to myself? You're speaking to me, aren't you, Kevin?
I'm to both of you.
Okay,
if you take it first, Lillian, I'm sure Carla will be more than happy.
So from my perspective, remember that you might know your mediators and that they're professional, which of course you do, otherwise you wouldn't have them. But what you've got to remember, they're not the ones going into the mediation, the parties are. And the parties' perception, so HR know their professionalism and they know the professional approach and integrity of the mediator. However, the parties who are being asked to participate don't. What they have is their perceptions, and that's the difference. So from me, as I said, I mean, when I was, remember I introduced it into our organisation, and it was around, you know, dealing with bullying and harassment, etc., and also sick absence. So I'm a fully pledged buyer and into mediation, full stop. I would not have left my job if I didn't believe in it. However, it is all about perceptions.
Okay, thank you, Lillian. Carla,
I think, yeah, Lillian has said it all out, and I've already said actually in terms of the, you know, certainly my experience of being an internal workplace mediator and just not having that issue with our HR or anybody else within to do anything other than to stick to my principles, my mediation training, and to ensure that the integrity of the process is honoured. So it's not really been an issue for me.
And I think it spirals up, doesn't it? Because if somebody is touching a union or touching other areas of the organisation, they find out about the person who's doing it. And if the person's sort of regarded in a good light, then it builds. And somebody was just saying in the chat that sometimes their union reps get involved, and again, I can see with the right person that could work very, very well. Sorry,
Yeah.
Nick, Lillian and Carla, I just wanted to, you know, sort that one out.
No, well, I mean, I had a follow-up just on that point, actually, and Carla, specifically for you, really, because if there is a manager or union rep getting involved, do you have, I guess, the power to say, listen, that's not appropriate, and actually you should step back from that?
Yes, absolutely. You can literally use the, you know, the principles behind mediation to say, actually, this isn't appropriate, and I can't discuss this anymore. And you just go through literally what mediation is, why it's confidential, why you're impartial, etc. So I don't know if I've just been lucky that it just hasn't happened to me. And I've worked both as an internal and external mediator, and it's certainly not been my experience to date. So either I'm just very lucky, or I've worked for really good organisations.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll reshare the screen, and you can continue.
Lovely, thank you.
Carla, this is me.
It is, yeah.
Okay, here we go. So sometimes you may not need to go down the road of mediation, although it is mediation we're talking about. Facilitation is very similar to mediation, but is really useful in a group environment. So facilitation would be used, for example, where there's a team of people, a group of people, and perhaps they're just not getting on, they're not really sure what the issues are, or there's clusters of people that get on and others don't, or the group has lost purpose, lost motivation, normal management intervention hasn't helped, or the manager actually needs some support in managing whatever the issues might be. So the facilitator would go in, would set some ground rules, some simple ground rules, just to encourage participation, and would identify what the issues are that are dividing the team. What is it that needs to change? What is it that needs to be worked on? What is it that needs to be discussed? And you would just be facilitating, probably using a flip chart, getting people to participate, to identify if there are any consensus, identify those, get some quick wins if we can. And then if at the end of the day there are still some outstanding issues, you're then able to identify what those are for them and that they need further discussion. But there's a lot more detail, if anyone is interested. If it's okay for me to do a plug, on my website, you can have a look at that, because we're focusing really on mediation today. In terms of, is there anything you wanted to add? Sorry, Carla, on that.
No, that's
okay.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, and the thing with conflict coaching, that's a really good sounding board. So basically, I would call the person who wanted conflict coaching the coachee, and they can use the conflict coach to basically as a soundboard to talk through something that they're worried about going into a meeting, that they're concerned about, or there might be challenging behaviour for a member of their team, or maybe going up to the director level, we don't know. But the thing is, they can talk about what's concerning them. You can explore with them what their current style of dealing with difficult situations are, and coach them around what else they might consider doing. Would that work for them? So it's really a bit of mentoring as well as coaching. So you're imparting some of your own knowledge, but you're also listening to what their fears might be in order to address an issue, because sometimes avoiding a conflict is just as bad as not dealing with it in the first instance. You know, it's allowed to manifest. In fact, I think avoiding conflict is probably one of the worst things a manager can do. That doesn't mean you need to go in heavy-handed, but it does mean that you need to explore what the issues might be. So conflict coaching can be really helpful. It can, because if you're going into a meeting and you're already, you know, like a rabbit in headlights, then, you know, the person that you're trying to manage is not going to be responsive to you. So conflict coaching, again, there's some details on the website if you're interested. And neutral evaluation, some call it assessment. Neutral evaluation is where there are issues and no one's quite clear what the issues are. What the person would do then, what the facilitator would do then, is take an objective analysis, speak to all the stakeholders, identify what they see as the issues are, and encourage different ways of dealing with the issues, whatever the matter is. But it's a non-blaming process. So again, it's to speak to all stakeholders, identify where there may be some gaps, where things could be done better. Quite a quick process again, although some organisations take days to do it because, again, it could be a money thing. But, you know, the bottom line is, if you're able to speak to stakeholders, it's very clear to you as an external where there may be some gaps, because when you're in the situation, it's not always easy to see things because you're seeing it from your perspective. So sometimes we can get into, if you like, tunnel vision. So what this helps you to do is get into peripheral vision, really, just to consider. Yeah, and again, I'll stop at that. Again, Carla, anything you want to add?
Just the only thing to say is really the other mediation I referenced before was something called directive mediation, which is basically where the mediator is going in and directing solutions. And of course, that's not what we're there to do. And of course, mediation is much better than the form of arbitration, which takes it out of the parties' hands. At least in our mediation, it's about getting the parties to come to their own solutions, rather than in arbitration, where a neutral third party is literally going to do a review and then impose their assessment on the parties, which can often be binding. So mediation definitely has its place and is very valuable, I think, as a tool for workplace conflict. Now I think we're over to the next slide. Okay, so this is just an opportunity. So two things here. We're just going to talk about some of the case studies that we've come across, and also it's an opportunity for everybody to ask any questions that they may have. But I was going to kick it off with a case that I had actually, which is probably the most memorable for me. It really stuck with me for a long time, and I still refer to it now. And this was with regards to an abuse case. So I had two gentlemen. So one was the manager, one was the employee at Loggerheads. And then when I was having my one-to-one with the employee, I knew something wasn't quite right. I wasn't getting told everything, so I just started probing, and it turns out the reason this guy had such problems with his manager was because he had suffered abuse as a child. He'd been physically abused, and it was by his stepfather. And unfortunately, the stepfather reminded him so much of his manager, from his mannerisms to some of the language used. And this chap was having a real difficulty getting past that. And of course, naturally, would, because every time his manager spoke to him in a way that that was authoritarian or directive, it was bringing back all these old memories of him, and he was transported to being a 7-8-year-old child again. So it was causing massive issues. So lots of tears, as you can imagine, but very, very difficult, very brave for this guy to tell me this, because he admitted during this mediation session that he'd never spoken to anyone about it in his life. This was the first time he was disclosing what had happened to him, as a child. So a massive moment as a mediator, and it was a case of, right, what do I do here? So first of all, it's the signposting. So I knew there were a whole range of organisations and charities that he could be getting support from. So fundamentally, it was about making sure he knew that after this session, he could go and get advice and support as to how to support him. Now, we went through to the joint mediation session, but he was, of course, not comfortable with me telling his manager about what had happened to him. So the way it was dealt with was I couldn't disclose, of course, what had happened to this person, but we agreed that I could say something about an incident that had happened previous in his life that reminded him, you know, not about the child abuse, but some of the difficulty that he'd had that reminded him in terms of the mannerisms and everything. And that was actually enough for the person concerned, because it was like, I'm sorry, you know, of course, there's nothing I can do about the fact that I remind you of a certain situation, but of course, just let me know what I can do to try and, you know, counteract that. Is there something that can be done that I can, or not say, that's going to, you know, to help the situation? So whilst, you know, we maintain confidentiality, we were able to get some way forward, because I was able to at least get the parties talking about the fact that there was an issue. It was beyond the parties' control, but let's see what we can do to try and, you know, make this easier for them both in the workplace. But it's an important case, because it just shows you never know what's going to come out in mediation. And I had no idea any of this was going to come out during the day, and you don't. And it's also a steep learning curve for you as a mediator to make sure that you're doing the right thing by those people. You know, that was a massive disclosure, and I wanted to, you know, be respectful and make sure that I served him in the best way possible. So I'm hoping that was absolutely the case. I know, Lillian, as well, you've had an abuse case arise during mediation as well. I don't know if you want to share some of that.
I'll just check, conscious of time. Yes, as Carla said, you know, people disclose. So we're in a really privileged position, because you, as Carla said, you never know what someone's going to come out with. It just goes to show that you'd built really good rapport with them, Carla, and so that allowed him to feel safe enough to share that with you. And absolutely right, you weren't able to disclose to the other party, but what you were able to do was give them some pointers around, you know, what was triggering this young man off. Now, I had a similar case. I'll just tell you very briefly. The lady who was working for this, it happened to be a chap, he kept saying things like "now then," and it was never brought up. She didn't mention it in her one-to-one or anything like that. But what I'd noticed again was we weren't really getting very far. They were both really good people at the mediation. Not that it matters what I think, but they were both really decent people, and I just couldn't understand why they weren't getting on. And every so often I would notice when this chap would say "now then," the lady would do something really subtle. I don't know if you can see this, but she would basically do this, or just a little body movement. And by the afternoon, I thought, I've got to find out. And so what I said, okay, let's just take a break, and I want to speak to you both separately, just for 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, the separation between, you know, when I spoke to the lady, I said to her, forgive me, but I just need to ask, and you can tell me to back off if you want, no problem. But every time he says "now then," I notice you sort of react to that. And she burst out crying again, and it, you know, another case, you know, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." And she said, "No, it's okay, Lillian. It's okay." And we'd had good rapport. And she disclosed to me that she had actually been sexually assaulted by Jim will fix it. She hadn't told anyone other than her best friend. Now, of course, that's a big dilemma, isn't it? Because here we are, we've opened up a complete can of worms. She's not shared that with her family. She's only shared it with her best friend. So what do you do with that? So I said, okay, let's just stop just for a moment. I'm just going to send the other chap away, because quite clearly it's not him. it's something that this young lady hasn't dealt with, but unfortunately, unbeknown to him, he's triggering this young lady. And what was agreed, sorry, Carl, I'm conscious of the time. What was agreed was that she should speak to her friend, because she said, I think I need to tell him. And I said, well, let's not rush. Why don't you have a chat with your best friend, because you said that you've spoken to her about it and she's aware, and take some advice. After speaking to her friend, she decided that she wanted to disclose to this chap that, you know, unfortunately for him, he keeps triggering her. And it was all, you know, and I said, well, let me draft up something that would say that you're going to disclose something to him, which has got nothing to do with work, but he has to give you a complete undertaking that he will not repeat this with anyone. And that gave her that safety, and he signed it. You know, obviously I had to talk to him and coach him. I didn't tell him what it was about, but just said, do you, I actually said to this chap, do you trust me? Which is really a hard thing. And he said, yes, of course I do, Lillian. And I said, right, well, you're going to be something that's going to be disclosed to you, but you need to sign an additional confidentiality thing, because this is nothing to do with work, which he was happy to do. You know, it was really powerful. I mean, I have to say, how I kept myself together, because I really wanted to cry myself. It was a hard case, but as you say, Carla, you never know what's going to come out of mediation. But yeah,
absolutely. Just as you said, Lillian, just conscious of time. Nick, do you want to just want to come back in and maybe talk about some questions, or
Yeah, well,
what would you like to do?
Thank you so much for those stories. It's really I think a powerful example of how mediation can work in the most difficult situations. You know, and you know, hopefully when we're talking about mediation, you know, a lot of it is around just a manager and someone not getting along. But you know, as you can, as I'm sure everyone can imagine, the nature of it that you've just explained is incredible. So Lillian, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, we do have some other case studies, but I want to make sure that if people have got questions, that you know that we can ask them, like Carla has said. I've got a couple of other cases if you wanted them shared. So just to let you know. Okay.
Well, no, thank you. Well, yeah, we do have some questions through. So shall we move on to them? Kevin, do you want to?
There's somebody else with a hand up as well out there. So
Okay, right. I'm going to try something which I've never done before. But yeah, Ant Matley, you have your hand up. I'm going to try and allow you to unmute yourself so that you can ask it in real time. So you should be able to now.
Oh yeah. First of all, I'll say thank you to Lillian and Carla. I've really learned a lot through this session today. And what it is the reason why I wanted to ask this question was we had a lengthy, over months, discussion through pay talks through mediation last year. But I was a bit decided with, not with mediation itself, it was after it. Because what it was, we had a load of issues, and at the start of mediation, we listed the issues we had, and these certain issues just turned around and right, okay, we won't speak to them, and that seemed like, you know, the company was happy to, you know, get rid of them. We had through all and all that lot, we did a lot of good progress, and then once we finished mediation, we went back to getting the final agreement. All these issues that we had at the start all turned finger what caused another failure to agree. And just like I said, I was a bit concerned that with mediation, we went through a lot of groundwork, and then it just seemed like the other party seemed to just want to add things back into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always sorry, is it okay for me to?
Yes, please carry on.
Yeah, that's always a difficulty, because and this is why it's really important at the outset you set out the you know, the objective, and why we've said before, whilst the past is important, it's absolutely important to have that future focus, because if you start concentrating too much on the past issues, they keep rearing their head, and there has to be a point that you have to draw the line in the sand, and as mediators we have to make that clear. We've discussed the issues, we know what they are now, future focus, and it's about bringing it always back to that, and that can be difficult, but that's a classic example where it can fall down if you don't keep reinforcing that future focus, and that's a shame. It's a real shame that that's happened in your case.
And I think I had an experience as well, just to add to that, where a couple of parties that I was dealing with, they kept returning to the mediator to say, now this has happened, what is your kind of opinion on it? So I mean, would you say that an ongoing, you know, almost relationship to a certain degree where everything needs to be passed through is you know, wrong in that sense?
Lillian may have a different opinion, I don't know, but for me as a mediator, this is the one reason why I do it all in one day, because I make it clear then that, you know, that adults have come to a written agreement, you've signed to say that you're going to be binding by this, now go and do it. You know, it's morally binding on you. The onus is on you guys to go and sort this now going forward. You've heard lots of things you weren't necessarily aware of before, so use that information and try and make it work, and make that agreement work. For me, it doesn't work where you keep going back, and I would discourage it, because at the end of the day, the parties have to do this themselves. And I do reinforce that when I talk to them.
Thank you. Lillian, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, because I couldn't, for some reason I wasn't able to hear the full question by the participant. But what I will say is that when we're in mediation, it's really important, as Carla said, that although we discuss the past, what I then do is check on and say, right, so are we ready to draw a line on the past and move forward? You know, and so that it's at that point, you know, that they're committing to moving forward. So it's not about going backwards. Otherwise, it's not mediation and it's not successful. You know, there's no, you know, at the end of the day, you've agreed, a gentleman, if you like, a gentleman agreement that this is where you're moving forward. What I do find is that can happen back and forth with, you know, private cases like divorce, because people are forever coming back because they want something different, you know, because they've spoken to someone else in their family has told them, no, you want to go for this. So it's a completely different environment. In terms of workplace, once you've drawn a line against the sand, if people come back to me after mediation, what I say is, well, you've agreed and you can have a review in 3 to 6 months. You've got to give it a try. Otherwise, what was the point? So it's just reinforcing what was agreed. I mean, some mediators refuse to talk to people afterwards. I don't do that. I'm a human and I treat people with humanity. But at the end of the day, you know, there is a point where, as you say, Carla, you know, we're all adults and we have a duty to stick to what we've agreed, and if not, then, you know, I incidentally I do speak with union reps as well. It's not a problem for me. You know, you know your stuff. You don't have to worry. You're not going to get drawn into anything. You know, actually, union reps can be really helpful because sometimes they give their members a reality check as well. You know, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
I hope I've answered that.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, yeah, it was a little quiet, but and hopefully that's answered. If there's any follow up, then put it in the chat, and we'll see if we can deal with that. That did kind of trigger something in me as well about this idea of whether or not, because mediation a lot of the time, I think, from a union perspective, comes into play after a formal procedure has happened, and so. You know, a grievance has happened or disciplinary or something like that. And so the question is really, and I guess you can look at it from both your angles, from internal and external. Is there a way of triggering mediation without really letting the employer know? I mean, Carla, for instance, is that part of your role? If someone comes to you and says, listen, I would like to start mediation with this person, but I don't really want, you know, the employer to know the full extent. And Lillian, do you get requests from that, you know, workplace mediation, you know, from individuals rather than the employer? Carla, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I've had the situation arise where managers have come to me, or HR has come to me to say the manager themselves wants to try and facilitate a discussion between two feuding employees. So I've had a bit of a coaching session actually at an early stage to say, okay, if you're going to facilitate some sort of discussion, then these are the principles you need to think of, and I'll go through what I've gone through in mediation. But I mean, typically there are tactics you can use to try and actually resolve issues, but it's quite difficult because you're working single-handedly. Then, you know, really you need the engagement of the other person if you're going to make it a success. And also if you try to do that, it feels like it's all very one-sided. You know, why am I making all this effort and, you know, and they're not? So I think facilitation through managers can work quite well where it's the very early stages. Again, if it's right for mediation, then it should go to a mediator as far as I'm concerned, whether it's internal or external. But it's a good start for the manager because it's good for them to deal with the conflict resolution, you know, and to have those difficult conversations. That's going to help them as their managers, you know, grow and become good managers as well.
Thank you. Lillian, anything to add?
So when I was internal, people could just request it directly. Obviously, because I'm an external, there's a cost associated to that. So they would have to get permission by either the budget holder, or normally people go through HR. So they don't go to their manager, they'll go to HR. And HR contact me, and it's a private arrangement. It's not something that anyone else needs to be aware of if it's not required. So yeah, that's all I can say on that one.
It does make me think as to whether or not unions actually have a bigger role to play and whether or not we could front the cost, but that's a completely different question. So there we go.
I think certainly there's a role for employee bodies and unions that they can request. And you know, it's going to depend on the experience of the people who are on the call today. But I think if there are employee bodies that haven't done that before, know their power, that they should be able to go to an employer and go, look, we've got a situation here, we're requesting that you do this, and move it forward in that fashion. We do have quite a few questions, but there has been some really positive reaction to the case studies as well. So we've got something like 12 minutes. Okay. I don't know what people would vote for. So I don't think we're going to fit it all in. Shall I start with the questions?
Entirely up to you, Kevin. If there are questions that people want to ask straight away, we can do that. If you want to raise questions out of this meeting, I'm quite happy to get back to people. I don't know if Carla's able to as well. You know, that entirely up to you. I've got a couple of case studies, but it's entirely up to you.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to lose either way, aren't I, whatever decision I make. But thank you for saying you'll pick up questions later, because I think that's really helpful, and that people can contact you, or if they want, they can come through me and I'll pass them on, because I don't think we'll get all the questions done. What's also lovely is that you've picked up and dealt with a number of issues as you've gone through. So there was the question about, do you find that it doesn't always stick? So you have a successful mediation, what looks like it, but later on it starts to unravel a bit. And I think you've answered that. That's about the maturity of the individuals. It's about the mediator contracting that it's their responsibility. But of course, you know, no mediator is going to turn away somebody knocking on their door again. We had a nice one from Mike Calvert, which was about that focusing on past issues and future issues and focusing on the outcomes. And again, you just dealt with that. Trevor Pugh made a similar issue, and I think you've covered that as well. So we're doing well. Lillian, you said sort of you've only had 5 failures. So what's the success rate? Are we talking like 5 out of hundreds there for you?
Sorry, that sounds like a big boast, doesn't it? But it's a fact. You know, of course I've done thousands, because, well, I'd say about, actually I don't know what the last count is, but I've done, they're in the hundreds. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to pay for my home. You know, so obviously I work for myself. Yeah, I mean, there's one big department that I do mediations for on a weekly basis, but they have thousands of staff. So yeah, I've done hundreds of mediations, and you know, although they're all similar, they're not. They're very different. What the mediation is literally driven by the parties, because you never know what's going to come out. A presenting issue, the HR might just say to me, oh, well, you know, it's a manager and a member of staff, and they're just not getting on. It's performance issues. They don't like being managed, and actually, yeah, that may be on the surface what HR is aware of, but beneath the surface there's something else going on. So again, each case is different. We are in a very privileged position as mediators, because we get to hear things that the organisation doesn't, but what we then do is encourage them to think about what can they do within their capacity, whether they're the manager or the team member. Because always, sometimes there's the other thing. If people are objecting to the organisation, it could be that they need to think about moving on for themselves, empowering them to do that. You know, so there is a bit of coaching happening in our discussions with parties, and actually it's a win-win, because if people don't want to be there, then it's good for the organisation, but it's also good for them, for their own well-being and mental health. So you have to tread carefully. Each case is different.
Okay, Lynn, thank you very much. And I'm going to say 5 out of 1,000. Carla, anything you want to add to that? If not, I'll give you the next question.
I think it's just shows you how powerful though mediation is, because it's quite a cathartic process. The only thing I would say is it's a cathartic process. It gets people really thinking about what they want to do, because it's that future focus, and that can be staying with the organisation or moving on. But it's actually a really valuable tool for the individuals that are in conflict.
Yeah, and sometimes a different role within the organisation as well. So there are other ones there. Okay. So COVID, post-COVID, have you done mediations via Teams and that like, and does that change and evolve things for you both?
Yes, it has. So I did one recently. When was it? It must have been a month or so ago, month or two ago, with a manager and an employee. And the way it was set up was to make sure I had separate meeting rooms for both, and we had a joint mediation session, all done over Teams, which does create a different dynamic, because you're not having to run around physically, to get to the venue for 9 a.m. and it's not, I mean, it's an exhausting day. You can imagine the travel through to either end, and dealing with a lot of emotive issues. It can be exhausting for all the parties concerned. So from that element, it's made it easier, but I think it's harder for that building rapport, because you're not necessarily in the same room. You can still see their faces, but it's a different dynamic, I think, having being face to face in the same room as somebody. But in terms of ease, it's made it easier. Sometimes just thinking of logistics, when you get rooms. So I always get rooms away from the workplace, on neutral territory. I'm very careful about, making sure that those rooms are soundproof, that we're near refreshments, that we're close by to toilets. So everything's sort of neatly there and set up for all the parties, because you don't have to worry about any of that when the people are in the comfort of their own home. And you could say there's an added benefit here for people, because if they are in their own home, maybe they are more willing to divulge rather than being at an independent venue. So that I think there are definitely pros and cons to both approaches, from what I can see so far.
Cool. Lillian, anything more to add, or next question?
Not really. I was concerned, because it's always good to have bodies in rooms. However, I'm a convert, I have to say. It's fine, absolutely fine. It's up to the parties. So no, it's fine. But I was a bit reluctant to begin with, if I'm honest. But no, needs must, and it's fine.
Yeah, bottom line is we've all got used to it, basically, haven't we? We didn't think we would. Some of us would have loathed it, but it's reality now.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to try and hedge my bets here. So one question we had in from Fiona was, what is the biggest challenge for a mediator? is that a question then adapted to what's your most challenging case? So here you go, 2.5 minutes each, no, 2 minutes each on your most challenging case. Maybe not the detail, but just an idea of the scope, framework, scale. And Carla, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, so I suppose there were two. There was this, of course, this abuse case that I've already dealt with, but also another one from a diversity, equity and inclusion perspective. So I had 3 individuals, all different nationalities. So I think one was Brazilian, one was Spanish, and the other one, the other lady was Bulgarian. And they were completely at loggerheads, and a lot of it was just cultural differences. It was literally down to the simple language directive. You know, some people, you know, I don't want to stereotype, that's not the intention, but we seem to have a typical way of doing things, and they just clashed, and it was more a cultural thing than anything else when I actually started to get down to the nitty-gritties. But you can imagine it was quite explosive at times, you know, but it was always about getting them back on the same page and being respectful to each other. So that was probably one of the most exhausting and difficult sessions I had. But at the end of it, they all, I think, were in a much better position as to you know, where each of them was coming from and had something to work from.
No, excellent. And I think I think we've used the word perception, explaining a position, and cultural. I think those are 3 huge dynamics within any management scenario. Also on the chat, there's been a lot of response to the comments about if you've got good managers who deal with conflict resolution in a good way, you know, that solves a lot of your problems. And somebody was saying, if you get mediation in there really quickly, does that help? And I know you're both going to say yes, of course. And actually, I would go further. If a manager can do it in the way you describe, Carla, if you give them the skills and they do it, they know the people, that can work even better. Lillian, 2 minutes on your challenging case.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you down. Sorry, was it the lady Fiona? I honestly just can't think of what was the hardest, because I've had groups, I'm really sorry, I can come back to you with that, because I'm going to need to think about that. But I'm just conscious that what we've covered in terms of our cases are things where people have had other issues, emotional issues. But actually, what I can, if I've got just 1 minute, can I try and share this one particular case? Have we got time? Have we got time, Nick? Yep. So basically, this case involves 2 people, a senior manager and a middle-level admin officer. The middle-level admin officer had appealed against her appraisal given to her by awarded to her by her line manager. The appeal was going to be heard by her line manager's manager. Now, it just so happens it wasn't scheduled in, the meeting wasn't scheduled. The admin officer is at a staff conference. The senior manager sees her in the room and shouts out to her in public, do you want to do the appeal now whilst we're both here? Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And simultaneously is asking another member of staff to take notes, who she happens to know as well. So the admin officer, quite rightly, said no, she refused. The senior manager couldn't understand. He thought he was doing her a favour. The young lady went back to the office the following day, put in a complaint to the director, which is the manager's manager's manager. And then he offered to bring this chap, the senior manager, in so that they can have it out, you know, have a conversation. She refused. She then asked if she could go into mediation, but be accompanied by her dignity at work officer. And go into mediation with an external mediator. So I mediated that case. So it's really interesting that the intention may have been good, that he wanted to try and deal with this quickly. But having heard what the admin officer said, which was quite right, she said that she and the incidentally the senior manager accepted the dignity at work officer to accompany her, because you need to get permission, so that was good. But the admin officer explained that his approach had undermined her, it was inappropriate, she felt pressured, and furthermore he'd caused her a lot of distress because he had made it public that she wasn't happy with her marking, and this chap who she knows is a bit of a gossiper, so she was really upset about that. The senior officer manager said, having listened to the admin officer, he recognised that although it was well intended, he had overstepped the mark. He had used his privilege as a senior manager to ask another employee to take notes without the consideration of the impact on both of those officers. So you just never know. Again, I just didn't want people to think that, it was just for cases where people are emotional. These are just typical everyday workplace disputes. But there was a big difference in terms of grades. It worked.
Thank you so much for no, I think that's a really interesting one, because you're right, mediation, I guess we'll talk about your most, I guess, challenging cases,
Yeah.
but lest we forget that actually mediation is there for a number of things which and hopefully to avoid it becoming so challenging.
Absolutely.
So listen, huge thank yous, Carla, Lillian, for a really interesting session. I can see some of the chat, and I think there's some really kind comments going on. So thank you everyone for attending. Special thank you to Lillian and Carla again for an incredible insight into that. As I said at the beginning, this is recorded and it will be on the website. So if you've thought of other people in your organisation who might find this of interest, then in a couple of days you should be able to see that on allianceforfinance.org. If there are other questions, you can send them through to the email address which you got the invite to, and I will field those and we'll try and get back to you if we can. But I don't want to overwork Carla and Lillian. You've already been fantastic. Thank you so much. Our next session, wait for it. We will be fleshing out the details, but we are hoping to do a session on menopause in the workplace, which will hopefully be a really interesting discussion. I think it's a topic which is at the forefront of a lot of workplaces' minds at the moment. So look out for more information about that. And just leaves me to say thank you so much again for everyone. Thank you again, Kevin, as well, and Caroline for fielding the questions and putting those to, and for helping me through this. And I will bid you all farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you.